All right, Alexander, let's talk about the negotiations with Iran and the United States. We had the second round of talks between the Iranian foreign minister and Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff. He is now the envoy for Iran as well. Okay. He met the foreign minister in Rome, and I believe Oman was continuing to mediate these talks, and the outlook provided by Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, was actually very positive. He did say that things are going well, cautiously optimistic, I believe were the words that he used, and we're going to be entering into technical talks in the next coming weeks between the United States and Russia. What are your thoughts on the negotiations?
Well, in some respects, and we've discussed this before, this should not be an impossibly difficult negotiation, because the Iranians have consistently said they don't want nuclear weapons, and the Americans have consistently said they don't want the Iranians to acquire nuclear weapons. So the parties appear to agree on the objective, on the end point. The only thing that separates them is the means to get there. And the means to get there are now becoming increasingly clear. So the Iranians give up their existing stockpile of enriched uranium, the stockpile that goes up to 60%. Apparently, they're handed over to the Russians again. The Americans then lift sanctions. There is more surveillance of Iran to make sure that they don't resume enrichment in the way that they had. This agreement, unlike the JCPOA, is indefinite. It has no end point. The JCPOA was just for 10 years. This agreement would be an indefinite agreement. The role of the Russians is going to be much bigger this time. Now, we've had an article about this in The Guardian, and the article talks about the guarantees that the Iranians are going to get from the Russians, who are facilitating these negotiations. The Russians will not only take possession of Iran's nuclear stockpile, but if the United States reneges on any part of the deal, then the Russians will return the nuclear stockpile to Iran. And that's in The Guardian. Apparently it's fairly well understood that this is what is being talked about. And of course, the Russians will be, as we discussed many times, present in Iran. They will have their people there. They will be providing Iran with new weapon systems, with Sukhoi 35 fighter jets and more advanced anti-aircraft missiles, and probably over in time integrating Iran's air defense system into their own, and all the kinds of things, all providing Iran with a level of security it has not had up to now. But Iran will not be a nuclear power. Now, Araghchi has met with Witkoff several times now. He's also just been to Moscow. He's had a meeting with Putin. He's had extensive meetings with Lavrov. You can see that the Russians are fully engaged and on side with this. And the Saudi defense minister has just traveled to Iran. And we can see that the Saudis are also involved in some ways, though we don't exactly know in what ways. So all of the pieces, in theory, to get a successful deal are in place. The Russians want this. The Iranians want this. Witkoff and the Americans want this. The Saudis want this. The objective is not difficult to achieve. It should all be within sights. We should be able to get the deal wrapped up, perhaps in 3, 4, 6 weeks. It's not impossible. What's holding this back? Well, the trouble is that for some people in Washington, and for some people in Israel, and by the way, quite a lot of people in Europe, preventing Iran acquiring nuclear weapons is not actually the final desired endpoint. The final desired endpoint is regime change in Iran. And they're coming back and they're putting more pressure again. And you could see that. So Witkoff comes back from Iran. He speaks optimistically about how the proposal is going forward successfully. Then Trump makes statements, which he's clearly been pushed into making by other American officials, probably by the Israelis as well, which start adding more demands to the discussions that took place in Oman. They make further demands about Iran giving up all nuclear enrichment entirely, disestablishing its entire nuclear program, its civil nuclear program, that kind of thing. Things which the Iranians are not going to agree to, and which clearly some people know that, and which look calculated to prevent a negotiation with Iran reaching a conclusion. And even as the negotiations move forward, you hear reports about military deployments, about bombers being forward positioned in order to conduct strikes against Iran. You hear reports about some kind of ground operation in Yemen being discussed in Washington. A disastrous idea, by the way. I mean, I have no idea who is thinking of this and what they think it would achieve. And again, you have this constant narrative about how Iran is weak, how its air defense system was destroyed, about how the regime is isolated and is in much more fragile position since the loss of Syria. And all we need to do is to push a little bit harder, to launch our strikes against Iran rather more aggressively, and we will get what we want. And as, by the way, you've discussed in a recent program on your channel, we now know that we again came very, very close to an actual attack on Iran. The Israelis came along. They provided Trump with a whole proposal list of targets that could be attacked in Iran. They told Trump that we should attack those targets. It was clearly envisaged as a plan for a military strike on Iran. And Trump actually said no and stopped it in its tracks. But the fact that the Israelis came up with this proposal at all shows that they must have had some support from some people within the administration and in Washington. So we are close to an agreement, but the counter forces are so strong, and the idea that victory over Iran is within reach is also so strong that it's going to be very difficult to get this through.
What do you make about the reports that Israel is pitching to the Trump administration limited strikes without the U.S.'s involvement? What do you make of those sometime in the summer?
Well, have we not heard this before? Limited strikes. It's like the Macron's plan in Ukraine last year. Limited deployments by French troops and all that. The United States doesn't have to be involved. Leave it to us. We can do it all by ourselves. All we require is of some intelligence from you, that kind of thing. Invisible assistance. But you don't have to be directly involved. Your people don't have to be directly involved. The reality is that Israel cannot by itself inflict significant damage on Iran's nuclear program. Now, or indeed Iran's military, I suspect. So when the Israelis are saying this, just like when Macron was talking last year about sending troops to Ukraine, what he really wants to do, what the Israelis really want to do, is that they want to provoke a crisis with Iran, because there will be an Iranian reaction. There would be counterstrikes on Israel, which would draw in the United States. It's still the objective of killing the head of the snake, taking out the head of the snake. And drawing the United States into this conflict. When people tell the Americans, look, we're going to do all of this, we just need you to agree. We don't need your support. The Americans need to be especially careful, because clearly, when people say that, they have another agenda on their minds. Now, just say something about Iran. I don't know how extensive the damage as a result of that Israeli strike to the Iranian air defense system really was. The Israelis say that it destroyed the entire S-300 air defense system. The Iranians dispute that vigorously. I'm not there. I don't know. But the idea that Iran is in a weaker position than it was back in 2015 is completely wrong. Iran may have lost its ally in Syria, but it has gained far more powerful friends since then. It's now a member of BRICS. It has a strategic partnership agreement with the Russians. It's reestablished economic relations with China. The strategic partnership agreement with Russia contains security provisions. Iran, from every point of view, is in a much stronger position to resist a long war this time than it was had that war happened in 2015. Again, people are not looking at the totality of the reality of the situation now. And I'm going to say something else. Clearly, this deal has to involve the Russians. And apparently the Iranians are now saying, again, I'm getting this from The Guardian, that they don't want the United Nations involved, and they don't want the Europeans involved either, because the Europeans acted as the guarantors for the JCPOA, and they weren't able to fulfill their guarantee. The people they now trust to act as guarantors of this new agreement are the Russians. It's in The Guardian. The Guardian is saying this. This isn't myself, inferring this. It is there. It will be the Russians who will provide the guarantee. And that tells you that today, Iran's position is actually very, very much stronger, because they're now going to get guarantees, which they weren't able to get before, they're able to get guarantees from a country that conceives of itself as an ally of Iran, and which is itself a nuclear power. Whereas in 2015, they had to look to allies of the United States to act as guarantors. And of course, we saw that those guarantees were never honored.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Europeans can't be trusted. They're not neutral. They're not honest brokers. They're vassals of the United States. So you go to Russia, and I think you brought this up maybe 2 months ago. You actually mentioned that Russia is going to play a part in this. A lot of people said, no, that's crazy. What are you guys talking about? But sure enough, here we are. Russia is playing a part in this, a very important part. But you don't only have Russia. When you talk about Iran, you talk about BRICS now. When you talk about Iran and Russia, you're talking more about BRICS. And with Russia comes China, and comes the entirety of BRICS. The U.S. is in a conflict, a hot war, more than a proxy war, a coalition war with Russia. They're very much involved in a war with Russia, and they're trying to negotiate some sort of way out of this. If you want to believe that, the Trump administration is trying to figure out how to get out of this conflict with Russia. They're now in a very hot economic war with China, and now you have Iran. How does all of this play out? Iran is a simple one to resolve if you really want to resolve it, but when dealing with Iran, you also have to deal with Israel as well, and Israel does not want to deal with Iran. the U.S. is involved in all kinds of problems, many of them of their own making.
Well,
Most of
they're
them,
all
they're,
of
they're
their,
most of them of their own making.
they're
Yeah.
mostly of their own
Exactly.
making. I mean, this is where we come back to that comment that we've made so many times in so many programs about the neocons who captured control of US foreign policy in the 1990s and have held a lot grip over it ever since, and still, despite the fact that Trump has pushed back against them in some respects, they still exercise far too much influence in Washington, which is that these people have no reverse gear. So it's completely unsurprising. It is, in fact, completely predictable that these people would eventually lead the United States into multiple conflicts all around the world against a whole host of enemies who are, of course, now cooperating with each other. So you're absolutely right. They've got this conflict with China. We've got this conflict with Iran. We've got this coalition war, proxy war, call it whatever you like. The United States is clearly a direct party in Russia, with Russia, and it's trying to do too much in too many places all at the same time. And the United States itself now acknowledges that its resources are now being stretched beyond breaking point. It needs to start to find ways to de-escalate some of these crises. But whenever we get to the point where we look like we might be on the brink of a breakthrough in any one of these crises, with Witkoff going to Moscow, for example, and coming back with all kinds of proposals from the Russians, which, as he correctly points out, don't act contrary to the core interests of the United States. When Witkoff again comes back from Oman or Rome and says, look, this deal with the Iranians is there. It's there for the taking. Again, they're not demanding the impossible things. The Russians can help us. They're offering to. They want to help us. Whenever anything like that happens, we get the same people. The neocons of various types and various stripes, they all come back and say, oh, no, we can't do this. We can't make these concessions. Doing this rewards bad behavior. It makes it more likely that the Chinese will attack Taiwan. They come up with some explanation, some reason for saying that, we can't make these concessions. And they always say the same thing. The other side is weak. We are strong. All we need to do is push back hard. The Russians, their economy is in pieces. Their army is exhausted. Iran, they're in a much weaker position than they were previously. They've lost Syria. Hezbollah's leadership has been decapitated. Their air defense system has collapsed. China is basically all smoke and mirrors. Their economy isn't really that strong. They depend on us as a big market. They always say this. And they always have, armies of people who write these articles in the various big journals in the United States. And when you read them, they look like they're well argued, except that they never are. They always skip over inconvenient facts. But they always push back. And that makes it, because these people are so influential and because American domestic politics are so partisan, and because they also hold a lock grip on parts of the American political class, including around 25 Republican senators. Just to say, it becomes incredibly difficult to negotiate these agreements with Iran, with Russia, with China, maybe over Taiwan or the South China Sea, which are there for the taking. They could be agreed. They would be very straightforward to do. If we're talking about Taiwan, I don't want to discuss Taiwan extensively on this program, but in my opinion, there's a deal available on Taiwan. Go back to what existed before Burma and all of these people started to stir up the pot in Taiwan, just let it continue as an autonomous entity, treat it, if you like, as an economic entity, but just go on recognizing the fact that China is the, the country. Anyway, you can do things, but they never do that. I mean, they don't negotiate with China over Taiwan. They are negotiating with Iran, but the agreement as us there is almost within reach. But you get all of these people who say, no, we can't do that. And the proposals they make to the Russians in the conflict in Ukraine are such as the Russians will never accept, and which make no sense for the Russians, as even a cursory understanding of this problem would make clear. Until we break from this tradition of no reverse gear, we are going to find the United States constantly getting into these conflicts. And that is something that Trump and the people around him need to understand.
Yeah, just a final note, the interesting thing is that you have Trump's envoy, Witkoff, who is outside of the government structures. The media constantly points this out. They constantly mock him as he's the real estate agent that Trump is sending around the world. But to be fair to Witkoff, he does appear to be able to find common ground with the people that he negotiates with, whether it's in Iran or whether it's in Russia. And he also did manage to get a ceasefire in Gaza 4 or 5 months ago. He does seem to be able to negotiate. This is clear, but there's always other forces that derail his agreements or his possible agreements, and the Trump White House always goes with those other forces, those establishment forces, which makes you wonder why send Witkoff then? Why do it if you're not going to commit to him to what he's doing?
Yes.
Then why go down that path? Just send Rubio. He is your Secretary of State. Well, I mean, what is Rubio doing? Does he just sit in his office and just spoil whatever Witkoff is negotiating? Is that what his purpose is?
Well, as far as I can see, that is exactly what his purpose is. I mean, the point is that Witkoff is supposed to be the lead negotiator, but he is not the Secretary of State. He is not the National Security Advisor. He doesn't have any formal role. Now, you talk about the fact that Witkoff comes from outside the structures, and he nonetheless is able to have a more realistic understanding of these conflicts and is able to negotiate them more successfully. Well, the reason he's able to do that is because he comes from outside the structures. He's not somebody who's, brought up in neocon thinking and absolutely conditioned with it and cannot see beyond it. Precisely because he is an outsider, he can see the facts and he can see the opportunities far more clearly, which is why, of course, the foreign policy apparatus doesn't like him and have been pushing back against him all the time. But you're absolutely right. Unless the president finally commits himself fully to Witkoff's course, because the neocons control the institutions, they will always pull the president back. It's not difficult to understand, because neocons are not going to change their habits of a lifetime. They're not going to make concessions, which, neocons don't negotiate. That's the first thing to say. The United States as a State Department would stop doing negotiations a long, long time ago. They don't negotiate. They don't compromise. They don't make concessions. All of that is impossible for them to do. Their entire conception of foreign policy is that the United States comes, makes demands, and the other side submits. That's the only approach they know how to make. And when somebody like Witkoff comes along and actually looks for common ground and acceptable solutions and shows a certain willingness to make concessions. It's called appeasement. And we have, Munich and 1938 revived all over again, and
Chamberlain,
the ghost of Neville Chamberlain and all of that. And this has been utterly disastrous, but it's brought us to the point that you said.
Yeah, it's not working.
It's not working.
It's failing miserably, actually.
It cannot work. What it has done is exactly what you said. It's landed the United States into all of these conflicts simultaneously in all of these multiple places. The global south is becoming increasingly exasperated. There are people in Europe, obviously, who are themselves neocons, are fervently supportive of all of this. But the long-term effect is disastrous. But I mean, if you expect the neocons ever to have that moment of realization, I mean, they never will, because that's not what they are.
You know, the interesting part to all of this, to all of the conflicts that the U.S. is now stuck in, if the Trump administration had taken our advice that we gave 9 months ago, we gave this advice, walk away from Ukraine, normalize relations with Russia. If this had been done on January 21st, then with the normalization 3 months later, after January 21st, with a more advanced normalization that would have probably happened between the United States and Russia, Ukraine completely off the table, not an issue for the Trump administration. I just want to find good relations with Russia. Many of these problems involve Russia, or Russia could play a key role in helping to mediate or solve these problems. You would be looking at a very different situation today for the United States, whether you're talking about Iran, whether you're talking about Gaza, whether you're talking about Israel, whether you're talking about China, whether you're talking about Syria, whatever the issue. Russia is there.
The US dollar, the position of the US
the
US
dollar, trade, energy, all of these things.
I know. But no, again, as I said, going down that route is appeasement. It's Neville Chamberlain. It's all of that. So, what you said, peace through strength, it's actually a disastrous meme. It leads you down a complete blind alley. Because, of course, at that point, you worry all the time about whether instead of strength, you're conveying weakness. I believe which is a hopeless approach to take in negotiations.
Yeah. Do you remember an interview with Putin where he did say something along the lines of Russia may not be at the superpower level, the complete superpower level of, say, China and the United States, but Russia makes a difference in so many parts of the world? I forgot the exact quote, but Putin did say something along those lines.
He did indeed say it, and we know when he said it. We don't have the exact words because, of course, they were never sent in a public place. But what happened was this, and I can tell you exactly, it happened back in 2011. Putin was at that time prime minister. Medvedev was president. Medvedev and Putin had agreed that they would switch places again and that Putin would run for president in the election in 2012. The Obama White House, Obama himself, who and McFaul, his ambassador, and Biden, who was his vice president, were determined to stop Putin becoming president again. So they sent off Biden to Moscow and told Putin, under no circumstances, are you going to become president again? If you do, that will not be not looked upon favorably by the United States. And Putin was furious, and he said to Biden, we make our own decisions. Here in Russia, we don't have you decide for us who our president should be. And then Biden came back and said, look, you've got to understand that you're not a superpower any longer. You can't, dominate the world as apparently you want to do. And then Putin apparently shot back and said, look, we're not interested in dominating the world. And of course, we are not a superpower like the United States, but we do have the power to decide who will dominate in the future. It won't be us, but who we align with. That was what happened. Apparently, this very, very fierce argument that took place between Putin and Biden all those years ago, and which, by the way, neither of them ever forgot, and which explains to a great extent Biden's animus against Putin ever since.
In 2011.
2011.
Pretty prophetic statement from Putin. It shows that Putin does have a very clear understanding of geopolitics.
Absolutely. And understands...
Biden doesn't.
Biden doesn't. He understands also the limits of Russian power. I mean, you know, this is a thing. I mean, Putin is many things, but he's certainly no megalomaniac, as some people in the West like to suppose.
Yeah. All right. We will end the video there. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rock for the Next. Go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch like what we are wearing in this video. Update. The link is in the description box down below. Take care.